people walked up to me and they're like, "You're the most inspirational guy in my life right now." That is so wild to think about, right? Like, because to me, it feels like work. I have to write these 4 posts because I'm going out of town next week. And it's like, I'm fighting through it. And some days I'm in fuego, but like most of the time, it literally just feels like a grind, like writing this shit. And the fact that, especially for this new B2B product that we have, right? Like the primary marketing vehicle for our company is also creating that type of affinity and inspiration in people is like, it's amazing. So it can't do that if you just only write about good stuff. No one fucking cares.
Welcome to the Rising Leader Podcast, bringing forth the new wave of rising leadership and helping leaders find purpose, connection, and results. This is your host, founder of Alluviance, Alex Kremer. What is up, y'all? Welcome back to the Rising Leader Podcast. And if this is your first time on the show, we welcome you. We're so grateful that you are here. This is your host, Alex Kremer. I'm very excited about my guest today, the amazing Mr. Adam Robinson. And first off, what up, Adam? Good to see you, man.
Hey, man, I'm flattered. Thank you for calling me amazing.
Well, maybe that might be shooting my shot a little bit too soon. We haven't even, hit fully record yet on this thing. So we'll see. We'll see how it
certainly
goes.
doesn't feel like that most of the time. I can tell you.
What's really cool, is that when we hopped on here, it's like, oh man, we live like 10 minutes apart from each other here in the amazing Austin, Texas. So we should have done this thing live.
Could have done it live, man.
We're here. We're here.
Yeah,
and we're doing part 2. We'll do live. Part 2.
Right. Perfect.
But Adam, I'm gonna give a little introduction on you, and then afterwards, I'll let you kind of fill in the gaps of anything that I missed. But Adam, you are the CEO of Retention.com. You have a pretty incredible background too, kind of just leading up to that, like former financial professional at the Lehman Brothers. Before even starting Retention.com, you founded and bootstrapped and sold an email marketing company for I think eight figures or so to a private equity company. You've been posting on LinkedIn in just such a powerful, very authentic and transparent way, which I'm very excited to be diving into. And one thing that, as I was doing some research on you, a unique fact is that you're former roommates with the people who started Vimeo, which I think is probably what started you in getting into this route, or at least, maybe lit a fire under you just a little bit. And you talk about 3 things very often that I really resonate a lot with, which is leadership, which is sales, and which is inner game, and just kind of that world there. So I'm stoked to be diving into this. I guess first off, Adam, how did I do on that? Did I miss anything? Did I say anything wrong?
No, that was great. That's pretty much it, to be honest. We could probably just end the podcast now.
All right, we're good. This is Adam. Goodbye, everybody. So, I want to start here. If you look at your LinkedIn, if you look at where Retention.com is, if so much on your brand, you say, hey, wow, Adam is crushing it. Wow, his company's doing great. He's speaking about true what leadership is. But through our conversations, you're like, hey, it wasn't always this way. And you talked about, hey, about 10 years or so ago, I was in a very, very different state than the persona or the identity with which I am right now. So I would love just kind of for you to go back just a little bit, like, where were you at 10 years ago? And what's been kind of the journey that's brought you to who you are now?
Yeah, to not be super 3 hours long about it. I worked at this bank called Lehman Brothers. I was a credit default swap trader. There's a movie called The Big Short, which is the job that I had. My boss is in the movie, his character. So, that was awesome. As you mentioned, the whole time I was doing that job, and I did it for a little under a decade. My first roommates started this company called College Humor, which was a company that started Vimeo, which got acquired by IAC, and now Vimeo is public or whatever. And these guys had this incredible, I didn't have the vocabulary or the maturity to sort of figure out what it was that it felt like they were, getting out of what they were doing with their life that I was not, but it was something that I wanted. Like there was something that was like, I was making a lot of money and that's where it stopped. And like they were just so passionate and like interested about what they were doing, and like they like had this cool office and it was young people and all this stuff. So and my brother was also an entrepreneur, and I felt the same thing from him. It was and now I know it's like they're building, right? Like there's an inherent human thing about growth and creativity and like building that like the job I had literally just doesn't have. But long story short, the financial crisis strangely was like great for people who had my job. And then my boss thought that Europe was going to have a debt crisis like the US. So he like sent all his guys over to London to basically get short the market. Didn't happen. Market rallied. He didn't pay anybody. I quit. I was, I'd like saved some money. So I tried to move back to New York, and like, I went through a very weird time in my personal life. Like kind of like everything had been going great relatively. Like I'd been sprinting too hard to even stop and sort of realize if it wasn't or whatever. And then, I basically my job blew up in London. It didn't blow up, but like it just was very clearly not going to work out. And so I moved back and took this job that like was destined to fail anyway. And then I moved back to like be with this girl that I was dating long distance from London, who couldn't move to New York. And she broke up with me the day I got back. And I was so mangled by it. Like I was 29, I think. I was so mangled by it that like I couldn't even think at this job. So I got fired at this job. And then it was this weird position where what I did, the market was like experiencing an extreme contraction phase after the crisis and with new regulation or whatever. And there were no good jobs. So I was like, I'm just going to try to be a tech guy. No idea what that meant, And I had like a couple $1 million I'd saved up or whatever, which is like incredibly fortunate for somebody in their 20s. And it started this 5-year-long road of making like terrible investments, hanging out with people who had no idea what they were doing, just like me, who like thought they were starting startups. And somehow one of them worked kind of enough to like be a lifestyle business. Didn't pay myself $1 for 5 years, spent every bit of that money that I had. And then, I got a company to work and be like, I got it to like 3 million ARR, lifestyle business, like whatever. It was an email newsletter app called Roble Email Marketing. And, as we were talking about, like at the time, and I'm not sure that I would have identified it as this, but like, my lifestyle versus now was just substantially less healthy. Like I was, single, and like reflecting back, like there was a deep yearning for through periods of it. Like some of it's a lot of fun, but there was like a deep yearning for like partnership that I really appreciate having now, having like a wife and a healthy marriage and like a kid and everything. I was just partying a lot, like single guys do in New York. I don't know. What are you going to do? Like, it's the best place in the world to do that. Like, it's the most fun thing you can do. It's like, just go out and like, I was just going out every night. Right. Like, and my job was not particularly demanding, like at the time. Like I was just trying to figure out how to grow this email marketing company and couldn't figure anything out. And yeah, I mean, it kind of, it's just interesting. It felt like a place of, if I described it to someone and was like, I have this 3 million top line, $1.5 million bottom line business that I have 2 other co-founders in, and I don't really have to work a lot, but it's not growing. Like until that last statement, it sounds awesome. And then if you really know tech, that last statement's like, oh God, because that's a really uncomfortable place to be in. It's like, kind of like, especially I was living in Manhattan, it's like sort of not enough money to like have a family. It's like, and it's like this slowly decaying thing, it was a really weird spot to be in. So, and then I spent, 3 years trying to figure out how to grow that. And that ultimately led me to this company. It started as like a feature in the email app. I heard that it was possible that if somebody hit a website and didn't fill out a form, you could somehow de-anonymize that to a deliverable email address. Sounded like magic to me. I was like, if I could do that, I could sell that to fucking anyone. Anyone with a website would want that. So took a year and a half.
Just so we know, I want that.
Personally. Yeah, exactly. So took a year and a half, figured out how to do it. And then it turned out that, it is incredibly marketable, just the description of that to anyone with a website. But like the problem is, the people who want it the most are the small guys, and they can't really get it to work because like how you can get it to work is you basically have to launder these emails in at a very small percentage of a much larger email program. I'm talking like 1% to 2% per day. So a lot of email has to be going out, and then you trickle these net new in. And the only companies that can really make it work reliably are e-commerce companies because their email program is like so substantial. So I ended up focusing on that. And then, throughout the journey, the business is much better. That like I now, this one's bootstrapped. It's 22 million ARR. It's like, going to generate 6 or 7 million of free cash. It's like a really good business. And I stopped drinking 3.5 years ago when I turned 40, like just to sort of be healthy. And, I'm with this great girl and have this great group of friends here and like have a kid. And it's just like the energy with which I have to pursue these initiatives. It's just much like I always had a lot of energy, but like I just feel like my lifestyle was taking away a quarter to a half of it. With basically a combination of like partying too much and sacrificing on sleep and like all the other stuff that drinking and partying does to you. And then for me, like at certain times throughout that journey being single, there was just this like obsession for partnership that I'm sure is similar to like the obsession to reproduce that like, is also this deeply human thing, right? It's like, you're going through this life at your time and at this time. And I think it's just, there's a reason why a lot of people get married, right?
Yeah.
It fills this hole for a lot of people in themselves that, kind of like the highs are much lower, but the lows are much higher. In the steady state is definitely, for me, it's definitely like more. One of our first employees of this company still works for us. And I had a little donut, the Slack meeting with her. And she's like, you seem so calm and at peace now. Like somebody who like knew me 6 years ago, like before any of this, the kind of inner game change occurred,
Do you credit that to being in a partnership, or I guess because you paint two very different stories from 10 years ago, drinking all the time, you were mangled through the breakup, like just different lifestyle, to now you've literally stopped drinking 3.5 years ago. Is that just the process of growth and maturity and evolution, or was there something that like really catalyzed you to be like, you know what? I need to fucking change who and what I'm doing here.
Yeah. I think it was like slowly improving in a lot of key areas. I did a lot of reflection around my 40th birthday. I don't know how old you are, but like
not yet 40.
There was, so like there was a period of maybe a year when I was kind of nomading it with this company that was stuck. I was like single and just bouncing around, doing digital nomad, bouncing around the world. And that was an interesting, if you want to call it, spiritual journey, because being someone who I had kind of, I went through before my first startup started working, I had another period of relative nothingness, like where I didn't have a grind every day. But that was an interesting one because like it was based on every lifestyle I had before. It was very difficult to not, like, I love traveling, and it was hard to not think that this was like the ideal way to live, right? Like, if you went to an office every day for 10 years in Manhattan, and New York has this weird thing of making you want to be gone, but then when you're gone, you think it's the center of the universe, and it's a very strange mentality that like is forced upon you there by everyone around you. So, you know, what was interesting was like, and I found this to be the case with a few major changes I've gone through. It's like, it's kind of like there's this hedonic treadmill theory where, you know, if you win the lottery, you get used to it in 90 days. Very strange. Most people, or like a year max, right? Like you return to your baseline level of happiness after extremely good or bad things happen to you. Most people, like people who were like incredibly content people before experiencing something like losing their legs or something, most of the time they actually return back to the baseline level of contentment that they were. It's wild. And miserable bastards, the same thing, you know, whatever. So, I like the interesting thing was, so like, there's like a euphoria, like this digital nomad thing. Like I was reading Tim Ferriss and like 37 Signals when I started my company, and like finally I like have this thing. And then, you know, I had been living in the same apartment in New York for 12 years, and like I got rid of all my shit and was living in a suitcase, and I just couldn't believe it. You know, it was like so wild that like it was just a weird thing to get used to. And then 6 months later, I'd be talking to somebody somewhere and they'd be like, oh, like, you know, so-and-so's like living out of a suitcase. And it didn't even, like, oh, well, I'm living out of a suitcase right now. Like I've literally been living out of a suitcase for a year, and I just, you stop thinking about it. You know, it's like you kind of like, that was a really interesting thing. I got used to these very different ways of living. And then, you know, I started to feel this like year 2, this kind of emptiness that I then realized was lack of community for me. You know, it was like, I kind of felt like men and women, like no one was taking me seriously in the places that I was because they just thought that I was leaving. Like, because I was, right? Like, and you kind of have this, I gained this appreciation for really having to work for the relationships that I want to keep in my life. So I moved to Austin, and I just like went ham at building community. Like every week I bought this great house. Every week, dinner party on Wednesday night. I rented a boat. I now own one, but I rent a boat every Friday, new group of 10 people. And then, you know, a year and a half later, got this great group of friends. So, so yeah. And then during this wandering period, I had a lot of time to reflect because I was not working 80 hours a day. And like, I remember reading something where Jeff Bezos was like, the reason that I moved to Seattle, you know, I was working for D.E. Shaw. They were going to pay me millions of dollars to stay. And it's just like $1 above the amount that it would take you to stay. Right. So like, the Wall Street guys, they know that number. Right. And he's like, and I know this because I was there. It's like the hardest thing in the world to walk away from because it's $1 above what's going to keep you there. So he's like, you know, the D. Shaw hedge fund owner, he was like, this would be a decent idea for someone who wasn't going to absolutely kill it in the hedge fund business and had a great opportunity, but like you are. So like, I think it's kind of crazy. But he's like, I thought about it as when I look back at my life when I'm 80 years old, what decision would I have liked to see made? You know? And so during this wandering period, I literally I tried to I have all my old journals. I was journaling every day. I literally wrote down like, when I'm 80, what do I want to see happen? And strangely, I wrote, I want to be sober in my 40s. And that like didn't, this is the first time I had ever thought about this. And I was like 36 or 37 at the time. So it's very weird. And like, I want to spend time with my family. And like, I had not even close to met somebody. Like, I want to give my 40s to like, you know, like focusing on, work and family and being sober and, being healthy and all this shit. And I sort of wrote it and didn't really think about it. And then my 40th birthday was coming around and I was like, I just started thinking about this a lot. Like what, when I'm 80, like, what do I want to look back and see? On my deathbed.
What I find really powerful and interesting is, I just moved into full-time CEO role about 3 to 4 months ago.
Congratulations.
And before that, it was my side gig that, I was doing for about a year and a half. And so just officially made the jump. And people would always tell me, like, hey, the CEO journey, I had like 3 people tell me this, like the CEO journey is a very spiritual journey. And hearing your story of kind of being that nomad, journaling every single day, like just kind of, you were getting more in touch with yourself and like who you really were. And I also very much resonate as someone who also lived in New York for a couple of years. There is this like feeling when you are there of like, this is the Mecca, this is the center of the world. And you get caught up in like putting on this persona or being this person or drinking, going out, whatever it might be. And, but that like those mid to late 30s for you, I just hearing that is like, yeah, you were on a fucking spiritual journey, whether or not you realized it at the time, but looking back, it really sounds like that's what it supported you with.
I think much more lost than I would have admitted to myself at the time, And then, I think there's this other part of it, which I don't know if you're feeling this quite yet, like 3 or 4 months in, but like, man, like I just don't know how a founder CEO's ego would not be almost like so deeply intertwined with this thing that you have created and you're still working on. It's like, so like that's a hard thing for like my company that's stuck at 3 million and not growing. Like it's hard not to feel inadequate, and like, it's hard not to question, like so like the way we got that business to 3 million was through a data mining strategy where we like basically figured out before built with or whatever, how to like create spiders that crawled all our competitors' websites and we just hit up their customers. And that worked, but then it stopped working because that pool of leads ran out. And MailChimp was so fucking good and that offer was so incredibly powerful that there was literally nothing I could do to compete with that offer. And it really made me question whether I was a legit entrepreneur or not. Like it kind of like felt like I was cheating that first time, right? So like I mean, it's like there's a lot of hard things about it because when you're stuck, the reality is your product isn't good enough, and your product not being good enough is you not being good enough. And it's like really hard to wake up and internalize that every day. It's fucking terrible, actually.
What I totally resonate with that. And I feel that it's like you tie your ego is the company successful? And that's a representation. Am I actually successful? Am I good enough?
Yes.
But
exactly.
One thing that you've been doing that's very different than any other leader, CEO, founder, whatever you want to call it on LinkedIn, is you've been sharing very authentically and very vulnerably about the emotional freaking journey of a CEO, of building a company, of both the highs, but you share a lot about the losses. Like I remember looking at, one of your posts and you're like, hey, this January, we had a painful quarter. We are down X% of where we are at. I think at one point too, you had to, lay off some people at your company, and a whole bunch of them wrote some not so nice things to say on Glassdoor. And I literally watched you read in this video these Glassdoor reviews.
Yeah.
Talking very poorly. And I just imagine like being an employee of the company or being a sales rep and like in the midst of a deal or whatever it might be. And it's like, damn, like you don't see that. That's counterintuitive to look how great everything is, but you're sharing the other side of it. Well, what's been I guess, why have you been doing that? And also what's been the impact of that?
So like the reason that I started publishing founder brand content, I'm not on social media in my personal life because I just am so afraid. The story is that like I went to this investor conference in 2012 when I was still in between finance and startups, and certainly wasn't my first startup launched in 2014. So like I was still like straddling these two worlds, no idea what I wanted to do. And there was this psychologist, Dan Ariely, who was speaking. He just wrote a book called Predictably Irrational. And Facebook was just starting to take off. And this guy was like, dude, like these people are going to hire the best engineers, the best sort of AI models they're going to build. And like everyone is going to lose control over their thoughts in their free time. And I was like, I'm not interested in that. And like it was right around that. I also read like 4 Hour Workweek, and Tim Ferriss was like, turn off the noise or whatever, stop reading the news. So I was just like, I'm not going to read the news and I'm not going to do social media. And that's just it. And like, I think I was probably I was like 32 at the time in 2012. And I think I was probably like one of the last people who could do that and like still be like a normal person or whatever, right? Like you can't, 10 years younger, I don't think you could not be on social media, or like 20 years younger, certainly not. But like, a year and a half ago, we were like, oh, we found our ICP. We really need to spread awareness. And then I'm like, okay, what is the most efficient way to spread awareness? And talked to a bunch of people, read Dave Gerhardt's Founder Brand. And, I came to the conclusion that building up a personal profile on social media organically was the fastest way to do it. And, I was sharing an office with the Jasper AI guys during this time period. And like, I just watched what happened with that company. It's like clearly the amount of dog shit that it's created by this machine. And I don't mean that it's not elegant copy, right? It writes very well from a technical standpoint. But like, I was like, now that this mechanism to create content like this exists in the world, the amount of
dog shit that's going to be out there.
Dog shit, yeah. It's so like, I think the problem was well summarized. Rick Rubin had Huberman on his podcast, and I listened to this episode, and Huberman asked him about AI, and he's like, look, the thing that I think is the most interesting about art, what we're talking about is, right? Like me publishing my journey for the public to consume and react to is art. There's no other way to describe it. In my opinion. It like meets all of the. Beautiful. You have to treat it that way. It's like Rick Rubin said, what makes art interesting is the perspective of the artist. And he's like, I don't know that AI has a perspective, which is kind of like, I don't know, like I have, maybe it'll get better. Maybe it'll like learn how to like, but like, I just had this view that like so much of this stuff would start coming out that if I could figure out a way to be orders of magnitude more authentic than what a normal founder brand effort would be, then my content would very likely get amplified as a dilution occurred by ChatGPT from everyone else. Does that make sense? So like, that's why I do all the video shit. Cause like, what could be more authentic than a founder's reaction over video to reading negative Glassdoor reviews for the first time, right? Like, like that's like the whole, kind of like the whole governing principle of my content. And I think, the journey is not good all the time. The journey is harder. It's like good a third of the time, bad probably more than a third of the time, and then hard all the time, right? So like, I don't know.
There's just an underlying hardness.
Yeah, it's just no matter. In the best times, it's fucking hard, right? And by the way, like the better product that you have, the easier everything is, in a sense that the shit actually works. Like,
Right.
My problem with like the non-product market fit situation I was in with my first company is like, never ask the barber if you need a haircut. Every fucking person I'd ever talked to would be like, oh, you should run Facebook ads. Oh, you just need like it's like, depending on what their agency did, they would be like, oh, your problem is like, and at least I was like, you're reaching so hard for like anything that can get you going, that you just end up trying a bunch of this shit. And like, the problem is, once you have good word of mouth, it all works. But like, until you do, none of it works. Right. So like,
well, my question for you is, I mean, posting stuff like that, it takes a lot of confidence to be able to do that, a trust in yourself that, hey, I'm about to tell everybody how, with air quotes, bad I look right now, or bad we've been doing. And especially if, you let your ego take hold, it's like, man, I want everybody to think I'm a badass. I want everybody to think I know exactly what I'm doing. All that comes up. Has it been hard? Like, has that, or have you always been like, hey, fuck it. Like, I'm just who I am. I don't give a shit what people say. Or has this journey of you actually starting to post some stuff that's a little bit controversial of how people view you, or even taking on a perspective that's going to rub people the wrong way? Like, is that hard for you to do?
I think the governing principle is trying to maximize authenticity. And so long as that is what's happening, I'm willing to take the negatives along with the positives. And like we were talking a little bit before the podcast, like a great example is we went through this euphoric period in the beginning of 2023. We were overselling everybody and misinterpreted it as, holy shit, we're going to be a unicorn by the end of the year. VP sales quits in June. We had way too many salespeople because we thought the TAM was way bigger than it was, because we were selling way too big of deals way too fast to people who they were whatever. It was just a disaster. So, VP sales quits. We scaled the sales team down from like 16 to 4, and everything got better. Like, everything moved faster, whatever. But like, during that time period, I was like being incredibly honest about how shitty everything was. And like, we're dealing with like contraction, churn, and this and that. And like, our head of sales was like, dude, like, I'm on with this prospect. He's reading your fucking post, and he's like, why should I use you if you're, people are churning? And I was just like, that sucks. But like, look at how many impressions that post got. Like, look at like, people are like thanking, like hundreds of people are like, thank you for sharing this. Like, I'm feeling the exact same thing right now. And like, there is no other venue to like get this type of empathy directed at me. Right. Like, so, when people see that I like post our monthly recurring revenue, for instance, the 3 questions immediately are like, well, what about your competition? Like, if you're, they know you're crushing it so hard, like, whatever, like, won't they copy you? And like, yeah, we have like way more competitors than we did 12 months ago, which sucks a lot. But strangely, half of them got there in a totally different way. Like, they were solving a totally different and unrelated problem. And they realized that when they used their tech to solve the problem we solved, it did the same thing. So all of a sudden, we got like 5 people that were in this other market that are like, grabbing all of our deals or whatever. And I think it would have happened anyway. I think the original, we're way ahead of them, right? So like, the original benefit of this audience is incredible. And then, I mean, it's just crazy. Like, everything that I put out gets hundreds of people, 500 people, like, it just gets a massive amount of reach. And I believe that not only the reach, but like, here's another story that I also told you, like, this very recently, I think that my founder brand has like passed a point where I can now walk around business type events, and the LinkedIn reach is enough where people are like in 3 different events last night, people walked up to me and they're like, you're the most inspirational guy in my life right now. That is so wild to think about, right? Because to me, it feels like work. Like, I'm like, I have to write these 4 posts because I'm going out of town next week. And it's like, I'm fighting through it. And some days I'm in fuego, but like most of the time, it literally just feels like a grind, like writing this shit. And the fact that, especially for this new B2B product that we have, right? Like the primary marketing vehicle for our company is also creating that type of affinity and inspiration in people is like, it's amazing, it's incredible. So it can't do that if you just only write about good stuff. No one fucking cares. Honestly, that's like it. It's like that is not the human experience, right? Like no one cares that you crushed it last month. 0 people. Like maybe your sales guys who are getting commission care. Like they care if you crushed it last month, if you got wrecked the month before and you were honest about it, Like they care if you like we're kind of stuck right now on this D2C side. We're trying to like figure out how to reposition ourselves amid all this competition. If we grow a lot in the second half of the year, these people are going to go nuts. They're going to be like, dude, like so awesome that you took us on that journey, right? Like people ask me about our ecom business. I'm like, dude, it's fucking hard right now. Like the churn's out of control. We got fucking 8 new competitors. I don't know what to do.
Well, what I find interesting about what you're saying there is there's a transmission, a vibration that comes through your posts, right? You can feel who you are, and obviously you are the biggest representation of who retention.com is and how all your employees show up, even what your product actually does. And if you're putting out this content that says, hey, we don't have it all figured out. Here's where we're struggling. Here's where we're also doing well. But you're bringing this level of like just a transparency and authenticity. People will trust you so much more. Because I won't name names, but I've been on calls with CEOs where they were, I worked for them and they were just spewing straight bullshit to whoever the prospect was about why we're the best, why the other product sucks, why we're, our NRR is so good when it actually and it's just like, dude, like even if like you're saying the right words, like whether people realize it, they feel the ingenuity within what you're saying. They feel the manipulation. They feel that with you. And I think you're just creating this brand of like, hey, they might not have it all figured out, but what I feel really confident about going with them, if it's not going well, they're probably going to tell us because they're telling the world this whole story.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right. It's like, I just think this is like the quickest way to build trust, which is brand, that there has ever been. Right. And there's a caveat to it. Like, when I was trying to write content directed at e-commerce founders, it was not resonating like it is now when I'm writing to SaaS founders and revenue leaders, because I'm a SaaS founder and revenue leader, and like I am on the same journey that they're on and I'm experiencing exactly what they're feeling. Right. Whereas like the e-com founders, like I don't run an e-com brand. Like I don't know what it's like to deal with fucking supply chains and, your Shopify site breaks or whatever. Like I can talk about people issues. Like I can talk about product market fit. I can talk about general philosophy, but like there's other people who are like way better positioned to have a very resonant voice as it pertains to their actual journey because they're on the journey. So all that is to say, like, yeah, it's creating an unbelievable amount of trust, but I think it's also, I have a unique perspective that I'm sharing, like bootstrap 22 million ARR founder, sort of 11 years in the game. Like,
I just actually want to highlight that because that wasn't a question that I asked, but it was one that I wrote down to ask of like, you bootstrapped your company from 0 to 22 million over a 3.5 year period and raised zero money, which I mean, I don't know anybody else who's done something like that. That's in and of itself going against the grain.
Yeah, and I think it's important to keep in mind that's part of the reason why the content has been prolific, because part of the story in itself is remarkable. It's like, not only am I willing to be transparent, I'm willing to be transparent about a remarkable situation. Like, there's a guy who's sort of an indirect competitor to the B2B space who's trying to also do a work in public thing. Their company's called Warmly. He's named Max. Max is a first-time founder, and his company's at 1 million ARR. It's like, okay, work in public. Like, I don't really give a shit, right? Like, it's like way more interesting when somebody's at 20, and it would be way more interesting with someone that is at 100. It would be way more interesting if somebody were at, like, if ServiceNow at like a billionaire or whatever the fuck they do is like working in public, being super, it's like, the perspective of back to the perspective, right? It's like the perspective of the individual and where all of this is coming from adds so much like resonance to the content, right? Like, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. Like, I think that Warmly, it will help him to work in public. Like, people tell me they love his stuff, right? It's just every single thing I put out gets 5 times or to 10 times the engagement of what he puts out, and that compounds over time. So it's like, but he's not competing with, indirectly, their product is competing with me. I guess indirectly you're competing with other people's eyeballs on LinkedIn, but like, it's not I would be very surprised if he were able to catch up to me in LinkedIn because of my team and what we understand about why what's working is working, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. Like, you don't need to, and by the way, it took me a year to figure out the voice, 12 months from when I started to literally understanding why the words that I was writing was resonating, and how, and basically like these different audiences that I now have, which are like founders, salespeople, and, high level marketers. Like, I know what to write to hit each one of those audiences. So
12 months to
12 months,
learn.
Yeah. From I'm going to do this to like, and by the way, the whole 12 months, I was like, I had this feeling, and I talked about it all the time with people I was working with. I'm like, something's wrong about this. And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, I don't know why I'm doing what I'm doing. Like, I know why generally, like, I want to like market my business, but like, I don't know why I am creating the content that I'm creating. And I don't know I don't know who it's reaching. I don't know why it's reaching the people that it's reaching. I don't know why, if something does well, it does well, and something doesn't. Now I understand it. I can be surprised. But when I write something that's hot, I'm like, that's going to fucking crush. And it's almost always right. Like, there's just like, if it's like predictable revenue is dead post, that's like a content pillar of mine. It's like, like the pillar of, or the post of like, I wrote one a couple weeks ago, is like the great SaaS pipeline crisis of 2023-24 explained in 60 seconds, right? Like, and it was just kind of a rewrite of this predictable revenue's dead. I'm like, that's going to fucking crush, just because it felt that way when I was writing it, right? Yeah, man.
I love it. Well, here is the final question I have for you. But before I actually ask that question, I do just want to like acknowledge you, brother, of just, how you show up, the energy that you bring, what you're posting on LinkedIn, just through your brand that you're developing. I'll just say it's a breath of fresh air. And like, it inspires me. And I'm assuming many people who are going to be listening to this podcast of like, oh, you don't need to say everything is good all the time. And now I'm starting to understand why you got a few people coming up to you at these dinner parties saying, hey, you're the most inspirational person.
Yeah, it's a fucking weird thing.
So just thank you for that and showing up that way. You're doing a ton for many others. My last question is this, and this is the question I ask every single guest on this podcast. This show is called The Rising Leader. My question for you is, what do you view as the rising leader?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, what comes to mind? So like, I think leadership more than anything else is like a by example thing. Like I want to continue to have a job so long as my daughter is like young enough to be very influenced by this type of thing, right? Like I don't want her to just see me playing golf every day because like I think that's what she'll think life is, which is like not. But like there's a great quote by Vince Lombardi, which I love, and I believe to be so true. He says, the quality of a man's life is directly proportional to his commitment to excellence in any endeavor. In my opinion, the rising leader is somebody who is not at the top of whatever the hierarchy is, who is living by that principle. Because if they're in the right place, they will for sure like ascend and bring others along with them. That's the visual that came to mind.
Hell yeah. Commitment to excellence is powerful, man. Well, Adam, thank you so much for being on the show. If people want to follow you, check you out, DM you, check out even what retention.com does, what is the best way to do so?
Yeah. So my LinkedIn's Retention Adam, or just search Adam Robinson, retention.com. We have this new product, our B2B, which I mentioned. It's like 100% free. You put a pixel on your site. We will pass LinkedIn profiles of your website visitors into Slack in real time. So your sales team can just hit them up immediately. It's dope. So those two places, LinkedIn and rb2b.com.
Hell yeah. Well, I appreciate it, Adam. And those, for those who are listening to this show, I know there is somebody who you're like, they got to listen to this episode. So please make sure that you share this episode with them. And Adam, thank you again, my friend. Appreciate it.
Alex, thanks a lot, man. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for listening to the Rising Leader podcast. Make sure you hit that follow button so you get notified every time a new episode releases. If you know someone who wants to take their lives and their career to the next level, send them this episode so we can all rise together. For more information, check out alluviance.co. We'll see you next time. And in the meantime, keep letting it flow.